How do you break down resistance without direct conflict? Think about it. When faced with opposition, the instinct is often to confront head-on, to meet force with force. But what if there's a better way? A subtler strategy that doesn't rely on brute strength, but on precision and insight. This is where separation tactics come into play, a method to weaken resistance by dividing it, piece by piece. The principle behind this approach is as old as warfare itself. Divide and conquer, a phrase that echoes through history, from ancient battlefields to modern boardrooms. It's not just a tactic, it's a mindset. Strength lies not in overwhelming the enemy with sheer power, but in breaking their unity. When you divide a force, you fragment its cohesion. You sow seeds of doubt, mistrust, and confusion. Resistance crumbles not because it's weaker, but because it loses its ability to act as one. Why does this work? Consider the psychology of groups. When people band together against a common adversary, they create a shared identity, a collective will. This unity is their shield. It empowers them, fuels their resolve, and amplifies their strength. But that shield can be shattered. It's fragile when tested by internal division. Imagine a resistance movement. On the surface, it appears solid, unified, and determined. But beneath, there are fractures, competing interests, hidden resentments, differing visions. These cracks are exploitable. By targeting these fault lines, you don't need to confront the entire force. Instead, you chip away at its foundation. You isolate factions from one another, sever communication channels, and create internal conflict. The group's ability to resist weakens dramatically. What does this look like in practice? Picture two scenarios. In the first, a united resistance stands firm. Every member supports the cause, communication flows freely, and decisions are made collectively. The opposition faces a monolith, difficult to penetrate and even harder to dismantle. Now consider the second scenario. The same resistance, but divided. Factions argue over strategy. Mistrust festers between leaders. Information is withheld or distorted. The once solid front becomes a patchwork of isolated groups. The opposition no longer faces a single force, but many smaller, disorganized ones. Each is vulnerable and easier to manage. This is the essence of separation tactics. Don't confront resistance as a whole. Separate forces. Fragment opposition. By doing so, you reduce their capacity to coordinate and defend. You turn a formidable adversary into a collection of weaker entities. The beauty of this strategy lies in its subtlety. It doesn't require open warfare. Instead, it operates below the surface, exploiting existing tensions and rivalries. It's psychological warfare, a battle for the mind and morale. When executed skillfully, it leaves the opposition disoriented, uncertain, and ultimately defeated without a single major clash. History offers countless examples. From Julius Caesar's campaigns, where he turned tribes against each other, to modern political arenas, where factions are pitted against one another to maintain control. The principle remains unchanged. Break resistance by breaking unity. But this is not about manipulation for its own sake. It's about strategic insight, understanding that power is not always in force, but often in division. When you confront resistance directly, you risk galvanizing it. When you divide it, you weaken it quietly and effectively. So ask yourself, how can you apply this? Where does resistance seem too strong to face head-on? What fault lines exist beneath the surface? Recognizing these is the first step to mastering separation tactics. Remember, divide and conquer is more than a tactic. It's a mindset for dismantling opposition. It requires patience, observation, and precision. But when done right, it transforms resistance from a wall into a series of cracks. Don't rush to battle. Look for the fractures. Don't confront resistance as a whole. Separate forces. Fragment opposition. This is how you break resistance without direct conflict, by turning strength into vulnerability, unity into division. How does separating forces actually undermine resistance? The answer lies in the very nature of unity and its power. When a group stands united, it acts with a single purpose, a shared will that multiplies strength. But when you introduce division, that power fragments. The collective voice becomes a chorus of dissent, and the will to resist weakens. The principle is simple. Break the bond that holds opposition together, and you break resistance itself. Consider this: a tightly knit group faces an external threat. Every member trusts the other, communication flows seamlessly, and decisions are made quickly. This unity fuels resilience. But what happens if you sow distrust? If suspicions arise about motives or intentions, suddenly, the group's cohesion falters. Confusion sets in. The once clear strategy becomes muddled under the weight of internal conflict. Here is a scenario to illustrate this. Picture two resistance movements. The first is unified. Leaders coordinate efforts, members communicate openly, and everyone shares the same goal. This group is difficult to break because it operates as a single, cohesive unit. Now, imagine the second movement. On the surface, it resembles the first. But beneath, there are divisions, factions with competing agendas, leaders at odds, and members uncertain whom to trust. Communication breaks down. Plans fail to synchronize. The group's strength is compromised. Which of these groups would you rather face? The answer is clear. Divide and conquer is about creating the second scenario, where resistance is fragmented and weakened from within. How does this fragmentation affect resistance? First, it reduces the ability to coordinate. When groups are divided, they cannot act in concert. Their responses become disjointed and ineffective. Second, it breeds mistrust. Members start doubting each other's loyalty or intentions, which saps morale. Third, it creates opportunities for isolation. Leaders or factions can be singled out and neutralized without triggering a full-scale reaction. This is why unity fuels resistance, and separation tactics dismantle it. The goal is not to crush opposition with force, but to erode its foundation. When resistance is fragmented, it becomes manageable. Smaller groups are easier to negotiate with, control, or defeat. Think about the effect of isolation on an individual versus a group. Alone, a person is vulnerable, their options limited. Together, they are empowered. The same applies to resistance groups. Fragment them, and you isolate each part, stripping away the collective power. But how do you achieve this separation? It's not about random division, but strategic targeting of existing fault lines. Every group has tensions between leaders, ideologies, or interests. Identifying and exploiting these fractures is key. For example, if a resistance movement is composed of factions with differing visions or goals, emphasize these differences. Encourage competition rather than cooperation. Foster misunderstandings. Create scenarios where factions question each other's commitment or competence. The result? Confusion replaces clarity. Collective action gives way to individual agendas. Resistance loses its edge. Think of a well-oiled machine. Each part works in harmony to produce power. Now imagine that machine with parts removed or misaligned. It sputters, loses efficiency, and ultimately fails. Resistance functions the same way. Separation tactics are the tools that remove or misalign those parts. This principle extends beyond the battlefield. In social movements, political campaigns, or organizational conflicts, unity is the bedrock of strength. When that unity fractures, so does the opposition's influence. So what does this tell you? Don't confront a united resistance outright. Instead, look for ways to fragment it. Break communication channels. Exploit internal disagreements. Isolate leaders from their followers. Fragmentation is the path to control. Remember, the power of separation tactics lies in their subtlety. You're not forcing conflict, but encouraging it to arise naturally within the group. This creates division without appearing aggressive, making resistance unwittingly self-destructive. The ancient strategist Sun Tzu said, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." Separation tactics embody this wisdom. By breaking resistance internally, you achieve victory without direct confrontation. Ask yourself, where does resistance show cracks? What tensions can be deepened? How can you encourage factions to see each other as rivals rather than allies? These questions guide the application of separation tactics. In summary, unity is the armor of resistance. Break that armor by separating forces. Fragment opposition by exploiting internal divisions. Don't confront resistance as a whole. Instead, dismantle it piece by piece, reducing its strength and capacity to act. This is how you turn a formidable adversary into a manageable challenge. This is how you break resistance through separation. How do separation tactics operate beyond theory, in the real world where power is contested every day? The answer lies in their versatility across social, political, and organizational landscapes. Whether you're navigating the volatile realm of politics, the dynamics of social movements, or the complexities of workplace conflicts, breaking resistance through separation remains a powerful tool. In politics, coalitions form the backbone of opposition. United fronts challenge authority, demanding change or preserving the status quo. But these coalitions are rarely monolithic. They consist of diverse groups with varying agendas and priorities. Here, separation tactics find fertile ground. Disrupting coalitions is a classic application. By identifying differing interests within a political alliance, you can foster discord. Maybe one faction wants aggressive reform while another prefers cautious negotiation. Highlight these differences. Amplify disagreements through targeted messaging or strategic leaks. The coalition begins to fracture under the strain of internal conflict, losing focus and momentum. Isolating leaders is another effective method. Political movements often hinge on charismatic figures. By undermining a leader's credibility or sowing doubt about their intentions within the group, you weaken the entire movement. Without clear leadership, resistance falters. Social movements operate similarly. They depend on solidarity and shared purpose. Yet, beneath the surface, there may be competing visions or strategic disagreements. Creating internal conflict, whether through misinformation, exploiting ideological divides, or encouraging competition for resources, can fragment a movement's cohesion. Consider workplace dynamics. Resistance here might emerge as pushback against management decisions, unionizing efforts, or informal coalitions among employees. Separation tactics can disrupt these by fragmenting groups, encouraging individualism over collective action, or fostering mistrust among key players. Fragmenting communication channels is crucial across all these domains. When groups cannot communicate effectively, coordination breaks down. Misinformation or restricted information flow creates confusion. Members become isolated in their understanding of events, making collective action difficult. These tactics are not inherently manipulative. They can serve as practical tools for conflict resolution. Sometimes, breaking down a large, entrenched resistance into smaller, manageable parts allows for negotiation and compromise. It opens pathways that direct confrontation would block. For example, in negotiations, separating opposing parties into smaller groups can facilitate dialogue. By addressing concerns individually, you reduce the complexity and resistance of the larger group. This strategic division helps achieve progress where a united opposition would stall talks. This adaptability is what makes separation tactics so effective. They are not limited to warfare or politics, but extend into everyday power struggles. Applied skillfully, they turn complex resistance into manageable challenges. But caution is necessary. Separation tactics require finesse. Too obvious or heavy-handed, and they provoke backlash, strengthening resistance instead of weakening it. The goal is to subtly exploit existing fractures, not create new, blatant conflicts. How do you identify these fractures? Observe group dynamics closely. Listen for disagreements, rivalries, or resentment. Pay attention to communication patterns and leadership disputes. These are your entry points. Once identified, you can encourage division through various means: selective information sharing, promoting alternative narratives, or highlighting incompatible goals. The key is to make divisions appear natural, as if arising from within, rather than imposed from outside. A practical example: disrupting a political coalition by emphasizing policy differences during public debates or private meetings. This forces factions to defend their positions separately, reducing unity. Or in the workplace, encouraging individual recognition over team achievements can shift focus away from collective resistance. Remember, fragmenting resistance is about breaking down complex problems. It's easier to negotiate or control smaller, divided groups than a large, unified mass. Separation tactics provide the strategic advantage of turning overwhelming opposition into manageable parts. This approach demands patience and strategic vision. It's not an instant fix, but a gradual process of dismantling resistance from within. When applied thoughtfully, it transforms opposition into opportunity. Ask yourself, where do you see potential fractures in the groups you face? How can you encourage natural divisions without triggering defensive unity? What communication channels can be influenced to create confusion or isolation? These questions guide your application of separation tactics across social, political, and organizational contexts. Don't confront resistance as a monolith. Separate forces. Fragment opposition. Use these tactics not just to defeat resistance, but to create space for dialogue, negotiation, and eventual resolution. This is the power of separation tactics in action. How do you implement separation tactics effectively? The answer lies in strategic precision, knowing where to strike, when to move, and how to exploit the natural fault lines within resistance. This isn't a reckless assault. It's a calculated campaign that requires careful observation and timing. First, identify fault lines. Every group, no matter how united it appears, has underlying tensions. These may be ideological differences, personal rivalries, competition for resources, or conflicting goals. Your mission is to find these cracks before your opposition does. Once identified, exploit existing tensions. Fuel suspicions. Encourage competition. But subtlety is key. You don't want to create obvious divisions that risks rallying resistance instead of breaking it. Instead, amplify what's already there. A whispered doubt here, a pointed question there. Let mistrust grow naturally, unforced but inevitable. Foster mistrust among opposing factions carefully. When people start questioning each other's loyalty or intentions, unity dissolves. But it must seem organic. Artificial manipulation is easily spotted and can backfire. Timing also plays a crucial role. Strike too early, and divisions may not have enough foundation to take hold. Strike too late, and resistance may have solidified. Observe the group's dynamics over time. Look for moments of stress or disagreement. These are windows of opportunity. Communication channels are another battlefield. Control information flow to fragment groups. Isolate leaders from followers. Limit interaction between factions. When groups cannot communicate freely, coordination breaks down and confusion reigns. Consider the British Empire's colonial governance as a historical lesson. They mastered separation tactics by exploiting tribal divisions. Instead of confronting entire populations, they identified rival tribes and encouraged competition among them. This strategy prevented unified uprisings and maintained control with minimal force. This example highlights the importance of understanding group dynamics deeply. You must know the history, culture, and relationships within your opposition. Only then can you target fault lines effectively. Subtlety, timing, and knowledge are your allies. Avoid heavy-handed tactics that trigger backlash. Instead, work quietly, patiently, and strategically to fragment resistance before it becomes unmanageable. To execute separation tactics, follow these steps. 1. Observe and analyze *, study the opposition closely. Identify tensions, rivalries, and differing objectives. 2. Target fault lines *, choose the most vulnerable divisions to focus on, those with the greatest potential to divide. 3. Amplify existing tensions *, use communication, actions, or influence to deepen doubts and disagreements without appearing overtly manipulative. 4. Control information flow *, restrict or distort communication between factions to increase isolation and confusion. 5. Exploit leadership conflicts *, undermine leaders subtly to weaken their authority and create power struggles. 6. Monitor and adjust *, continuously assess the impact of your actions and adapt your approach as dynamics shift. These steps require discipline and strategic patience. Separation tactics are not about quick wins, but about long-term advantage. Remember, the goal is to break resistance without provoking unified backlash. Keep your moves quiet but effective. Let the opposition's own divisions do the work for you. Ask yourself, where are the existing tensions in your opposition? How can you amplify them subtly? What communication lines can you influence or disrupt? When is the right moment to act? Mastering these elements transforms separation tactics from theory into powerful strategy. Don't confront resistance as a whole. Separate forces. Fragment opposition. Use subtlety and timing to break unity and weaken resistance before it can rally. This is how you dismantle opposition with precision and control. You've seen how separation tactics operate, how they fracture resistance by targeting fault lines and exploiting divisions. But what about history? How have the great strategists of the past harnessed this principle to overcome formidable opposition. Let's turn to one of the most iconic examples, Julius Caesar. Caesar understood the power of separation not just in battle but in politics and governance. Facing diverse tribes and rival factions, he didn't rely solely on force. Instead, he used the strategy of divide and conquer to dismantle resistance from within. How did he do it? By identifying the rivalries and tensions among his enemies and turning them against each other. He formed alliances with some tribes, offering incentives and protection, while isolating others. This created distrust and competition among groups that might otherwise unite against him. Caesar's campaigns in Gaul are a textbook example. Instead of attacking a united front, he exploited tribal divisions. Some tribes were encouraged to break away and ally with Rome, weakening the overall resistance. This fragmentation made it easier for him to control vast territories with limited forces. Beyond the battlefield, Caesar applied separation tactics within the Roman Senate and political circles. He played factions against one another, aligning with some senators while isolating others. This maneuvering weakened opposition to his authority and secured his rise to power. What can you learn from Caesar's approach? First, recognize the value of alliances. Don't dismiss potential collaborators simply because they are part of the opposition. Sometimes, bringing a faction to your side can create a domino effect that breaks resistance more effectively than outright confrontation. Second, use incentives wisely. Offering rewards or concessions to one group can encourage defection and deepen divisions. This strategic use of resources creates fractures that are difficult to repair. Third, remain adaptable. Caesar adjusted his tactics based on shifting alliances and emerging tensions. Separation tactics are not static. They demand continuous assessment and flexibility. Finally, understand that separation tactics require subtlety and patience. Caesar's success wasn't overnight. It was the result of careful observation, calculated moves, and exploiting opportunities as they arose. This historical example reinforces the timeless nature of divide and conquer. It's not just a military tactic, but a comprehensive strategy for overcoming resistance in any context. Ask yourself, where can you build alliances within your opposition? What incentives could encourage division? How can you adapt your approach as circumstances change? Harnessing separation tactics like Caesar means thinking beyond direct confrontation. It means breaking resistance by breaking unity, turning potential threats into manageable challenges. Don't confront resistance as a whole. Separate forces, fragment opposition, use strategic alliances, incentives, and adaptability to dismantle resistance effectively. This is how history's greatest strategists have mastered the art of breaking resistance through separation. And so can you.